This episode is supported by Enscape, empowering your design workflow by turning your BIM model into an immersive 3D experience. So we just did a presentation for the AIAS FORUM CONVERGE. It's a mouthful of a title, but the AIAS, American Institute of Architects Students Forum, which is one of their kind of annual events. The other one is Grassroots. And they held it in Denver, which I'm not sure how many people were actually in Denver, if anybody, because the thing that we did was virtual. But we did at Tech, we did a brunch and learn, which is...
Ooh, a brunch and learn.
Yeah, because, I mean, you span time zones. You can't really call it a...
Yeah.
It was lunch on the East Coast. So that was the time slot. But we did a presentation for the future of this profession, is what I would say. And I think, I wasn't involved in AIAS when I was in school.
I was the Auburn University president.
Dang, look at you, go-getter. Like you had extra time to do stuff in school.
So it was funny it started out that we had a good community of friends and students and stuff at Auburn. I think the overall body count of students count.
The Walking Dead.
Yeah. I guess that was an appropriate phrase. But we had couple hundred students in there, and so it was a relatively tight knit, especially in our grade levels. Each grade level maybe had range between 50 to 70 people, and so you have classes with every one of the people that you graduate at least once, if not more times than there. And of course, studio, it's this kind of amoeba of
communal living.
Exactly. And I was there twice, when I was going to school, and I kind of dropped out of school for a while. So it was before I dropped out. That was when I was more involved with AIS. And it seemed even more communal living because we were there during our summer option program, where the people who are transferring in had the entire first year program was all wrapped up in a summer semester. And so that was a very tight knit group. And then, as you say, communal living. I mean, we literally had I brought in a sleeper sofa. People were building bunk beds, hammocks. I mean, it was so funny that numerous times you'd get off the elevator, because a lot of times we were on the fourth floor of our building, or the penthouse, and
nice.
And you'd get off the elevator and you'd smell people's crock pots going. And you're like,
I was wondering where you were going to go with
this. It's a gumbo night, or
yeah,
right. And I mean,
it's potluck.
I swear, I mean, there would be so much. I mean, it was fun. I mean, and I'm sure, I don't know how schools and universities are, especially during the past 2 years of the COVID events and stuff.
They're missing out on this kind of community.
They totally are missing out on this community stuff, and so I kind of
how you build real relationships.
Exactly. So we used to have a good community where, we'd have dog days of summer and things like that, where we would, grill out, do hot dogs and hamburgers and everything else. And so for the longest time, because I had gotten out of the Army and gone, straight into school, that I was kind of the grill master, because it was just when I was in the Army, I was always the grill master, and, we're running just doing hot dog and hamburger for field days and things like that. And so anyway, we did that to raise money, and I kind of just got involved that way. But then I got involved a lot more where, I was helping on planning committees for our Beaux-Arts Ball and our pumpkin carve, which is this awesome annual event that we do every year, where every student and, mostly even professors get together, and we do this big, massive pumpkin carve. And we've got our entire courtyard, which is kind of on this main thoroughfare between the dorms and the rest of campus. So everybody flows through there. So it's a massive event. I mean, it is a massive event. Thousands and, tens of thousands of people come to this event. So it's it is a thing. It is. And so, I started getting involved with that, and they're like, "Oh, you need to run for office." I'm like, "I don't need to run for office." No, you need to run for office. I'm like, all right, just put my name in there. And somehow I got elected president.
You're such a pushover.
All right, fine. It's
okay. Since you're twisting my arm.
Yeah. So I'm like, all right, fine. So somehow I got elected president, and
you volunteered.
And it was, or voluntold. And it was actually kind of a fun year. We got to do a lot of, we instituted a lot of different things, like architectural movie night on every Thursday. We would have like this architectural movie night where people would like pick some strange and obscure movies, like The Belly of an Architect, and just weird, strange movies that architects would like, or future architects at this particular point. And so we did things like that. And then we helped also like set up different lectures and all that other stuff, which everybody's school does. It was a blast. I loved it. Loved actually getting involved with it. And unfortunately, the second time around when I went there, I was married. I was just trying to finish up school and, get done and get out kind of thing. So I got involved enough just to kind of like help out with like certain events and stuff, but I didn't get as involved. But I think it's a great program to kind of help build community in the architecture school, and then connect with the broader kind of architectural community, linking with professionals. And it's really a lot of like what we do is just like try to help students figure out if like, this is the path for them.
It's funny because you're talking about this as like all the benefits of it and the community side of it. And it's funny because like my mind went to, it's like more time with architects, and it's like further, hazing's not the right word, but it's like conditioning, right? For setting you up for what life is actually going to be like, which is spending all of your time with architects. And it's like, got to get out of that echo chamber sometimes.
Well, yeah. But I mean, the interesting thing was it was a mechanism to kind of get away from some of that stuff. We did
sounds way more fun. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. I mean, we did camping trips, canoeing trips, hiking, like barbecues, a lot of barbecues.
That seems like the AIAS thing on campuses is hosting barbecues.
Oh, yeah. There was this one great event that we did that was just like this art walk. It was that was something that was more of like my contribution, because at like early on, architecture and art were all in the same building. And then as the campus grew and the programs grew and all that other stuff, art needed its own place that was much larger than the buildings that they could share.
The other programs always get the new buildings, by the way.
Yeah. Well, art actually stayed in the building where architecture had started. And we moved to a brand new building across campus, which was
didn't see that coming.
Architecture, music, and theater were all kind of like in their group.
Interesting combo.
So yeah, it was actually. But the thing about it was so like with that physical move, there was almost a mental move between the two. And so like there used to be all these events that art and architecture would do together. And that hadn't been the case for like decades. I was taking some classes, and one of my favorite professors in architecture, her husband is a professor in art. And, we got to talking like, we really got to like reinstitute this art walk. And so we basically got together with the art program. If I say it's about a mile, between the two buildings, it's not really hyperbole. It is a pretty good hike from one end of campus to the other end of campus. It may not necessarily be a mile, but it's pretty damn close if it isn't. And so what we tried to do was basically like identify this path between the two buildings, and then create like these little like events between the two that would go on for an entire week. And so people would just kind of like walk back and forth between those, and there would be like all sorts of events and everything. We try to integrate it with some other things that were going on within, the Auburn campus, like Hey Day, where you walk around and you're like, hey.
That sounds like an event. So here's what you do during this event. You say hey to people.
Oh, I dare anybody who's listening to look up Auburn University Hey Day. And
all right, we'll put a link to it in the show notes.
It is an event. It's an event. It's quite a thing. But yeah, you walk around, hi, it was there to kind of promote friendliness and just kind of like community and things like that. So,
Sure.
it isn't just about like, walking around and saying, hey, y'all, hey, you know.
Well, it seems like the AIAS captures students who are, I don't want to say next level, but this is kind of it seems like there's an energy there that, and I was not a part of it, and I was aware of some AIAS events. I just felt I didn't live on campus, and I think a lot of the AIAS students who were in my program were on campus, and it did become a lot more community driven for on-campus students. So I was a commuter, but it does seem like there is kind of like this extra layer of community that happens with AIAS.
Funny enough, I was a commuter too, but because I was a commuter, I kind of felt a slight disconnection from all the people who either lived on or near campus.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
And so that's kind of why I got involved. Plus, also, I was older. I was a transfer student. I wasn't part of like the clique of like people who...
The initiation.
Exactly. I didn't go through first year. I didn't do all of those things. And so I wanted to get involved in that. And so anyway, back to your video.
Well, before the event, I reached out to a bunch of architects that I know in my network across the country and asked a couple of questions just to keep it short and pointed. And it was, advice for students, knowing what you know now in the profession. And you were one of them who contributed to this, and I'll put a link to the video. We're not going to repeat all the information that is in that video here, but the two questions were knowing what you know now, everything from capital A blank page, start a new project, capital A architecture, designing the form of the building, the program, synthesizing all of the users and stakeholders. Like there's so much in the front end, and then all the way to the, end of CDs where you're specifying every single piece that goes into a building and the assemblies and the way that it needs, the design intent. You're basically explaining the design intent. There's a huge spectrum there. And there's so many things in between. There's technology layers, there's user group meetings, there's design, there's project architects, there's technical architects, there's people doing the modeling, there's consultants, there's, coordination. There's so many things in there. What advice would you have for students to give them a leg up when they come? Because it seems like this audience, the AIAS students in particular, are the ones who are, they're very much looking for making a difference in the profession. And I think that if you're going to make a difference in the profession, you need to approach it with the wisdom, the good stuff from the leaders who are already there, but then make it what you want it to be as a collective, as a generation of architects. And so to me, that was kind of the point of capturing that knowledge from a few different architects across the U.S. and architects in quotes there. I mean, it's people in and around architecture.
I was actually kind of glad that you did that because there's a lot of times, and how many times have we asked ourselves, and even on this show, how many times have we asked ourselves, it's like, if you knew what architecture was before you got into architecture, would you get into architecture? Would this, it's like, everybody's like, ooh, I want to be an architect. It sounds so glamorous.
I know. I think there is like some of that rose-colored glasses stuff going on for sure. And our point was not to say, look, it's totally screwed up.
No. No.
Because in some ways it totally is. And in other ways, there's never been more opportunity than there is right now. So this is definitely like my goal wasn't to say like, look, do you guys really know what you're getting into? Because I hope they do know what they're getting into. And I can't control like how much exposure they've had or that they've intentionally tried to open up for themselves to see what it's really like. And they're still saying yes to it because they are members of the AIAS and they are graduating and they are going to come into this profession.
So one of the goals that I had for one, joining the AIAS at the time, but then becoming AIAS president, was to kind of increase exposure to professionals. Because coming from it, having a career prior to going into architecture, 5-year career of being an active Army soldier, I realized that most of my knowledge came from kind of exposing myself to the elders, exposing myself to listening to the stories, the teachings and whatnot of the people who came before me.
Sponging it up, right?
Exactly. Because
at that age, you are like ripe for that.
Totally. And that was one of the goals that I had for what I was, kind of like the events and things that I tried to do with the AIAS is just try to get more exposure to the people in the profession. And especially like the second time around, even though I wasn't as actively involved with AIAS by running for offices and things like that, I always kind of like stayed in touch with the AIAS folks and kind of gave them like, hey, here's some great ideas. Because what was interesting about as everybody's sort of heard the story of like, I went into the Army, got out of the Army, went into college, ran out of money and kind of dropped out of school, and then worked at a firm for 4 years and then went back to school and then finished up. And so there's this interesting kind of like sequence of events of my experiences. Like, I had this experience of like how to be an employee and learn and all of that other stuff. Then, was a student, then learned how to be like somebody working in the profession, my chosen profession, and then went back to school. And so there's always these links of being able to kind of like look back at my past of like, okay, how can I best enrich others in this chosen profession that we got into? And, it's just like looking for those events to link people up with and kind of like, I always ask myself, you and I've like talked about like the whole, would you have gone into architecture if you knew what you were getting into when you did that? And not to sound like, oh, architecture's so tough. Would you have really put yourself through what we put ourselves through? And the answer has still always been yes. But I ask the same question of myself in the Army is like, if I knew what I was getting into when I went into the Army, would I have done it? And the answer is still yes. And those are the things that I wanted to try to expose when I was in AIAS, wanted to expose people. And so the video that you created is great in the outreach that the AIAS and the grassroots and what was this one called? Forum. Like, so these forums and stuff, this forum and then the grassroots forum are great to have students exposed to it. Now, you're right. There is kind of like it's more of like there's an interesting mentality of, people who get involved with AIAS versus people who don't. And I kind of wish that the people who do would try to reach out to the people who don't and try to include them in a lot of these events and try to include, or at least that was always a struggle or a challenge for me is like, some of the things that I'm trying to do, I always made open, not just to AIAS people, but to the entire program to make sure that,
body, yeah. Oh yeah.
Like, program. Okay, I landed a once in a lifetime opportunity to, when I was president, long history of all of this. And so short story long or long story short, everybody knows that Paul Rudolph went to Auburn. And if they don't, Paul Rudolph went to Auburn when it was not called Auburn. And there was a falling out between him and the university. And so he never really wanted to come back for any kind of like talks or lectures or things like that. And he's our number one graduate. And so
there's a parallel story with Frank Gehry at my school for this story.
And so he was on a lecture circuit and he came to Auburn, but he did not come to the university. It was a university adjacent lecture that he was doing. And I saw that he was coming and I kind of reached out to his people and stuff and got him to at least agree to kind of like meet, not just the AIAS students, but any student who really wanted to come and just kind of have like a kind of a one-on-one, let's just have a meet and greet kind of coffee. It was at a coffee house when coffee houses were huge because this was, early 90s and that's where people met. Yes. And so, he came and he was gracious and he like met us and talked to us. And those were the things that I was trying to do is how do I expose the students to the professionals and let them just kind of like have like this one-on-one conversation. I did it with Charles Gwathmey. I mean, he came to like have a lecture at our university, at the school, and he did that. But then he made himself available to like have conversations with us. And it was only through like the efforts of, like the AIAS that we were able to like kind of secure some of these cool things where like we actually would be able to sit down and have candid conversations with like, what is it like to be in the profession? What is it like to like get to the level that you are, and how, what are the struggles that you went through, and what was it like when you were a student, and just things like that. And that's what I loved about your video is that, you were talking about very specific kind of topic, but the topic was,
it's open to interpretation, right? Like
exactly.
It's an open-ended question.
Exactly.
What advice? And oh man, that could go so many different directions.
There is, and I don't have it sitting around me, so I'll have to find out, what it is, and maybe just throw it in the show notes. But there was a book that my boss at work had given me to read, and it was basically a book by a lot of like top architects on that very question. It's like, what advice would you give your younger self? Basically a letter to your younger self. It's like, here I am, I'm like 25, 30, 40 years in the profession. Here's all of this like wealth of knowledge or experience that I have. What would you, what kind of advice would you give your younger self? And it's the same thing as like this video that you had. It's just like, what is the advice that you would give to students? And in a way, I was sort of giving very similarly. I was like kind of giving advice to not only them, but like even myself, really,
Yeah, right. Yeah, totally. That was exactly it. I think that helps kind of frame the question. What would I have liked to have known when I was a student because of what I know now? And that will just naturally apply to lots of other people. And some people interpret it as like, no, here's what I would tell students, and not necessarily my former self, but to prepare them for the future and to prepare them to be in the right mindset to make it their own, right? Make this profession their own. Let's take a moment and talk about the sponsor of this episode. Enscape is a leading real-time rendering and virtual reality tool for the global AEC market. It plugs directly into your modeling software, giving you an integrated design and visualization process. With Enscape, you can render in real time and walk stakeholders through your rendered model with incredible ease. Your buildings can be experienced long before they are built. More than 200,000 unique monthly users from over 150 countries use Enscape to envision better designs. To learn more or to sign up for a free 14-day trial, visit enscape3d.com/Archispeak today. That's enscape3d.com/Archispeak. I think what's really interesting about AIAS is it's a volunteer organization. And so when I talk about the AIAS students being the ones who are really like raising their hands and actively participating in the profession and their education, it's because of that. It's a completely volunteer run thing. And so there's this kind of insane amount of effort being put into it on top of their normal architectural education. And so I think it's really impressive. And so that's why I couldn't wait to get in front of these students and give a presentation, but then also follow it up with, because we could only include a little bit of it in the presentation itself. We didn't have very much time. This video that I ended up making it's about 40 minutes. It's 6 different people. So it's everybody's kind of giving a little bit of advice, but then when you add it all up, it's quite a bit. And so that, again, we'll put a link to it in the show notes, because I think this show, students listen to this show, but also mid-career professionals listen to the show, and late career professionals listen to the show. We've heard from all of them. And there's late career and mid-career professionals that have advice to give too. That I would love it if that's you listening right now, to go to that video and add it in the comments right there. So just go there and do that. You don't even have to watch the video. Just add your advice to the comments, because this needs to be an ongoing conversation, and this needs to be the kind of thing that happens more and more in this profession, because we see the lack of mentorship. We see the lack of connections, and we see these students kind of hungrily reaching out and saying, like, look, help us out here. Just because the older generations had to go through what they had to go through to get to where they are doesn't mean the younger ones have to do exactly the same thing. And I think that is kind of a common mindset. It's like, well, here's what I did, so you should have to do it too. That's not going to be the case. Like, we can see it right now. It is totally different and it will not be the same. I mean, COVID as the number one thing to stare at in that topically, they're not getting the same experience, and they're not going to get the exact same experience. And because of that, like, we need to create these resources so that they don't have to reinvent this profession. And like, pieces of this profession need to be reinvented, don't get me wrong, but a lot of it doesn't, because there is a lot of amazing wisdom and knowledge and experience that can be shared. And so I just encourage people to do that. And then if you're a student, if you're the younger, emerging professional, early career professional, I would love to know what resonates with you from what you're hearing, either through those comments or through the video itself. Because again, this conversation needs to evolve and not just be like a snapshot in time. So that would be my my ask of this audience.
And what's interesting is, like, to take that even one step further is, like, what have you learned? What kind of advice would you give, not only a young professional or student, but also yourself, of what you've learned over the course of the last 2 years? Because as we all know now, like, there is going to be a dramatic, there has been, there will be, and there will continue to be this dramatic shift in the profession, in the way that we work. People are still working from home. People are, working from home, but with a blended schedule of at home and at work. And some people are just like straight out at work. But I feel like there's a fundamental change in the way that we're going to be working. And, something that I find very interesting is, like, what kind of advice would you give yourself just on, like, okay, the past 2 years, what has it taught us? The past 2 years has changed the way that I view the way that I work, the way that we work, the way that the profession works. And what are those observations? What would you do differently? There's a variety of things that I, was just talking about. There's a challenge to, managing really, really large projects, 100% virtual. And so there's some trial and error type things. Sometimes error, sometimes it works. And so it's just like those questions of, like, how do you, what are those challenges, and how do you face them, and how did, what would you do differently, or what did you learn? And it's interesting, because if you, like, due to what the kind of intent of the video is, what is the advice to kind of, like, what advice would you give to students or your younger self or whatever, can take, as you said, kind of take, many different forms or many different interpretations. But a lot of, and I can't even remember what I said in the video, but a lot of it was coming from where I am right now, in, like, the challenges that I faced over, like, the past few years of trying to be more technologically savvy in the way that I work, so that I can embrace, like, the next phase of the profession and the next phase of how, in the way we work.
Yeah. And I think to throw another little carrot out there, because a lot of times mentorship is one-to-one, and because of technology, we now have the ability to be one to many, 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 like tens of thousands of people, if not more. And things like this podcast and things like YouTube as platforms for messaging, right? Getting communication out. I think that people have a much bigger they have the potential to have a lot bigger impact than they think. And I don't think that there is any bad advice here. Like, this is where you get to interpret that question however you want. And you don't know what you're going to say, but I encourage you to say it anyway and get it out there, because we can reach so many people. We actually have the ability to affect the entire future of this profession in a much bigger way than, like, our 5 closest friends, which is, like, when I was in school, that's what it was. That was it. It was a very small network. And now we have the ability, we are hyper networked. And that was kind of the whole point of our talk, was about building your network and how important building real relationships in your network is. And so on one level, like, you're speaking out into the void. there isn't real relationships there, but you are giving your advice to anybody who's looking for it. And on the other side, we're saying, like, look, take the time to build real relationships, and you can, like, because of technology, actually, you can do that in an insane way now that you couldn't do before. It wasn't based on your it isn't based on your location anymore. And that was probably one of the biggest takeaways from this talk, was the importance of relying on other people to fill the void of what you don't know, because you can't know everything as an architect, so don't even try. Like, obviously, there's tons of stuff you're going to be self-interested in or have to do for a particular role in a particular firm on a particular project and all those things. But you can't know everything about everything that goes into your buildings and into the design and what you want to actually see happen in the world. And you have to be able to rely on other people. And my point of view is, like, the technology, and this is where all the older generation is raising their hands and going, like, yeah, like it's not all that. It isn't, because on some level, it's just data, and it doesn't connect the dots, and it doesn't encapsulate experience or knowledge. And to me, that's where people come in. I mean, right? That's what we're talking about when we talk about building these relationships, which is people can do that kind of stuff. And so by building your network of people, and not just like sites you visit and places like directories of data, because those are just points along the path, they don't connect the dots. The main message was for these students was take the time to start building real relationships and build those so that you can rely on those people when you're doing architecture, when you're doing those projects, because, man, they're going to, like, if they could save you, like Charisse Lakeside was one of the people on the video. And she's like, if you could save 50 to 90% of your time, would you? Because somebody else knows that way better than you can. Like, that's amazing. That's an amazing resource, but only if you build it intentionally.
Well, I mean, think about this, and think about this whole importance of networking. So Charisse is a great example. I had a friend who I worked with here in our Baltimore office, that he and his family were moving out to, the Portland, Oregon area. And he was and I asked him, like, hey, have you started looking around? Do you, like, what's your status on kind of like job search? And he's like, I don't really know anybody. So, I'm just kind of cold calling people. I was like, hold on. And so I reached out to Charisse and other people that I knew, but, specifically like Charisse, and because I knew that she had a great network of people. And so through my network with her network with other people, we got him set up with, a handful of interviews. And
it is who you know.
Exactly.
Like that, they say it's not what you know, it's who you know. Like, especially when you're trying to land a job. Totally true, right?
And so, and what was funny is, like, I've done that so many times for so many different people. It's just like, I'm getting ready to move to this location. And how many times have I even talked to you about, like, hey, I've got somebody who might be, moving into this, and you even interviewed someone. But also, like, what I love about the network that has been created through a variety of different platforms are things like, hey, I'm working on this project type, and I've done this before, but, what I'm specifically doing might be a little bit new. Or, I mean, hell, if you recall, I was doing a pedestrian bridge in St. Louis, and there was a couple of things that were, I hand drew out like some pretty complex kind of like shapes, but I didn't know how to model them.
Right, I remember that.
And
I'm laughing just because you sent
it to you, and you were like, oh yeah, and then you sent it back to me, and I'm just like, oh my God, this is amazing, and like, how not only like that you did it, but like how quickly you did it, because I knew the right people to go to ask those things, and that is the beauty of networking, and that is the beauty of the AIAS, and that is the beauty of this kind of like connection of people that you make within school or even in this profession, so that we always try to make sure that, like, or at least a lot of the times we say, you are not in this alone. Strengthening your network and, like, really kind of like keeping a bond with, some of these people. I mean, I may not see a lot of the people in my network ever, or, maybe like once or twice a lifetime or something. But every once in a great while, I'll just drop them a line and just say, hey, how are you doing? Just to kind of like, say, let them know I'm thinking about them, just keeping that connection fresh, keeping my name in the back of their mind, just in case they ever want to reach out and ask me for advice and help. And numerous times I get texts or emails or things like that just people asking questions, or people asking like, hey, do you know anybody in this area? I'm thinking about moving, and I don't know any contacts in this, but like, hold on, yeah, I know somebody.
Right. It's incredible how important that is, and how that is the whole kind of thesis of this talk was that during the educational part of our career, we are taught to be completely self-sufficient. And this is the opposite of that, because there is no way you won't do a project by yourself, and you can't do a project by yourself. But that is how we are trained. That's how we are licensed. And there's definitely some attitude about that exists out there, right? Which is like, no, you're going to go through this because that's what I went through. Like, you're going to do it this way because that's how I did it. But what we're saying is that it doesn't work like that in the real world for the, and this is important to learn as early as possible, because the sooner you learn it, the sooner you start building those relationships, and the sooner you do kind of supercharge where that information can come from, instead of just kind of blindly searching into Google to find maybe what you're looking for, maybe not, then it's going to save you a ton of time and effort, and you're actually going to be able to achieve the bigger picture things that you want to achieve, because you're not doing the minutia part of it. And I think that's where architects are best suited, is to steer the ship and not have to be the one doing every single little task. That's how we're actually trained to think, even though we're trained to operate independently and like in our own little silo.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. And I mean, that's the one thing that, being more funny enough, somebody who talks like on a bi-weekly basis or whatever it is that our podcast comes out.
Yeah, whatever it is.
I have always been kind of like a little bit more self-sufficient and introverted, weirdly enough. But because of this, because of our network, because of the people that we know, like, I know more people than I thought I would ever know. I've met more people than I thought I would ever meet. And it is because of the importance that I, finally put on networking and relationship building, and, making sure that, and I'm not like the first person that would go running out like, yeah, let's go do this. It's just like, but I see the value in the networks and the connections of being able to, like, hell, if through just the networks and connections that I've created, I'm able to like help out friends and, and build, bigger and stronger bonds and stronger things. And then that's, to me, is even more important than, just saying, hey, I know Evan, he's a friend of mine. Hey, I know Evan, and Evan's, been great. And he's like, you know where I'm going. I'm mumbling now.
Yeah. Well, I think that this show is a great example, and it's something I even brought up in the talk, and that was because it has created opportunities that we could have never foreseen. And it was through kind of that, well, we're going to do this. We did take it upon ourselves to do this. Nobody asked us to do this. Nobody made us do this. But so in that way, it is kind of like a self-sufficient thing. But on the other hand, it has created opportunities to do exactly what you just said. And it has led to not only like personal opportunities, but to opportunities for others who just kind of were lucky enough to go along on this ride with us, right? Like, that to me is just I can't even explain that. It's something that I find incredible satisfaction in. I think that's also what you were saying. You're not going to just do that for you. It's going to, everybody actually can do it for each other by deciding to do this for themselves. Really hard to explain for me. I don't know why.
Right. No, yeah, I know.
Anyway, I have a video of our presentation that I'll be posting too. It should be up before the show goes live. But then, I think the real meat of it is actually in that interview from architects and pros that are out there who have that advice for students and for emerging professionals, because to me that we need to do this more. Again, like I really encourage everyone to go and add their 2 cents in the comments to that video and like make it a resource for students that they can scroll through and find something that resonates with them. And you can have a big impact because we can reach so many people through platforms like this and YouTube that we never had the ability to do before. That's to me like one of the coolest things about this is there's going to be people who see this who you would have never have thought, and who are in some weird tiny little country in some weird situation, but they've got internet access. You're going to have the ability to impact potentially somebody on the other side of the world or somebody in your neighborhood, right? And you don't have control over that, but you can help the situation, and we can help the future generations of our profession so that we have a profession in the future, but importantly that it's their profession and that they can take the good stuff that we have for them now and augment that with their point of view and make it what it needs to be in the future. I think that there's huge potential for that. So again, just encourage everyone to go click on that link and add your comments, because it is useful and helpful. And even if you don't think it is, people will find it, and people will find it useful and valuable. Anyway, it was fun. And I never saw the ability for me to speak with so many students, but you could probably trace it back to this show, right? Like how did I get there? Because of doing something like this. So anyway, it's pretty cool. And you were a part of it. So thank you. And I appreciate everything that you said. And I think that having a further conversation like this to continue the conversation is awesome.
Yeah. And I think, thank you for including me, but I think that this is an important conversation that everybody has and should keep having, because that literally is what enriches the community, what enriches the profession. Is this constant conversation, this constant connection, this constant just unity that, sometimes doesn't seem like it's always there. But, when you really step back and take a look at it, it is there. It's there. It's just you have to seek it out. Don't work in a silo.
Get out of the tunnel. All right, man. Well, until next time. Thanks to Enscape for their support of this episode. Visit enscape3d.com/Archispeak today for a free 14-day trial. Thanks for listening. This show is part of the Gable Media Podcast Network. See all the shows at gablemedia.com. That's GABLMEDIA.com. You can help support what we're doing here by leaving a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts to help get the word out, and don't forget to share it with your friends. We'd love to hear from you, so leave a comment on the website at archispeakpodcast.com, where you can find our entire catalog of shows. Talk to you soon.